Good morning, Catholic versus Catholic. My name is Taylor Schroll, and you're listening to Catholic versus Catholic.
So just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would, please. Who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe it.
So my name is Taylor Schroll. I am a full-time missionary in Central Texas with Ablaze Ministries, working in youth ministry as I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. Also, in my spare time, I am the founder of Forte Catholic, Forte Catholic, Forte meaning loud, which being loud is one of the few things that I'm very, very good at. And there I have a podcast called Forte Catholic. I travel the country, speak, and lead worship. That's who I am. I'm a husband of one, a father of three, got a 5-year-old who just started kindergarten. I've got a 3-year-old who wants to be in school but isn't. And I've got a 10-month-old that doesn't want anything because she's not smart enough to have desires.
Speaking of youngsters, can you just talk about some of the earliest impressions you had of God and religion, please?
Well, absolutely. So right when you said first memory, I immediately thought of my actual first memory. It wasn't in church or anything, but I got a juice box from my neighbor. That's actually my first memory ever. And it wasn't at a church or anything, but I think it was a very spiritual moment. I was so blissful that I'm pretty sure that's what heaven feels like. The less than 2-year-old me drinking a free juice. I mean, if that's not heavenly, I don't know what is. But that's a great question because let's see, what is my first memory within a church? I remember being bored a lot as a young child. I remember going to CCE and not enjoying it. Those are probably my first experiences in the church that I remember.
What about the earliest point in time where you said to yourself, I choose to believe in this God that everyone's talking about? Do you remember accepting the faith as a really young person?
I do remember that moment because, I grew up in the church. I was baptized Catholic. My parents took me to Mass every week. I was in CCE, bored out of my mind with both of them until junior high. And then I started going to a non-denominational church that had just opened up across the city. And my mom made a deal with me, and she said, hey, I'll take you to that church, but you have to go to Mass with me in the morning first. And I was like, okay, fine. She's like, it's at 8 a.m. And I was like, ugh, because she knows I hate waking up early. So in all of her brilliance, she wanted to see how much I actually wanted to go over there. And to her surprise, I believe, I went with her to 8 a.m. Mass. She brought me over to the non-denominational church for their service later in the morning. And it was there that I think, had my first experience with Christ. I really encountered him in the community that they had at this non-denominational church. There was a bunch of young people who were actually excited about their faith. The music was amazing. The preaching was amazing. And I truly encountered Christ in the scriptures there. And that was the first time that I really started caring about my faith in a real way. And then the summer after my 8th grade year was when everything changed. I went to a Steubenville youth conference right before I went into high school, and I realized that, okay, this Jesus that I've learned about my entire life, I have all this knowledge from the Catholic Church, I have this experience of him in community and in the scriptures, that Jesus is present in the Eucharist. That was my first real experience in the Catholic Church of being one with Christ and truly giving my life to Christ there at that moment on my knees in a stadium with 3,500 other teens in it.
I'd like you to talk, without getting too personal, of course, but I'd like you to talk about your family, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, and just sort of the ups and downs of family life in relation to this whole Catholic or religious experience.
Yeah, so it's a mix all across the board. I have some atheists in my family. I have some diehard Catholics in my family. I have some diehard Protestants in my family. And I have a lot of cultural Catholics. So a lot of the generations before really got a disservice from the church, where it was all about knowledge and memorization. There was no connection to the why, or why should this mean anything to me? And I think that's what my parents experienced growing up. That's what my grandparents experienced growing up. It was all just, hey, you go to Mass because that's a requirement, and that's about it, And that's kind of the most prevalent thing in my family. And my mom was a huge catalyst in my spiritual life. So she was very very, very Christian. Grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school, very Christian, very holy. Like prayed for me. Like she is the only reason that I think I'm anywhere near being a decent person, because my mom continues to pray for me and has since day one. And when I had my conversion within the Catholic Church, she had to stay one step ahead of me because she was in a lot of Bible studies, truly loved Jesus, truly was into her prayer, but was like, okay, I need to get more into this whole Catholic thing, and really started diving into that. So it was kind of cool that we got to do that journey together. She always stayed a few steps ahead of me in that department, but she was one of the biggest catalysts and reasons for me being any part of a spiritual life or faith.
And what about emphasis? Like some people are into the charismatic movement, some people are into Opus Dei, some people have a very Marian type of devotion. I think that's common. I think that's ubiquitous, the Marian devotion, but some people shy away from Mary, even within the Catholic Church. I think that's exceptional though. But can you just talk about the flavor? Was there any particular flavor that you were drawn to?
Yeah, so the two big things for me in high school and even in junior high were community, praise and worship, and the scriptures. Those were the big things that really spoke to me and have formed me at a young age and continue to be three of the biggest parts of the faith for me. Now, our youth group was an amazing community of young people, so many people striving to live for Christ and going, most of us, we lived in a small town, so we all went to a public school, so trying to figure all that out. How do we live out our faith in a public school setting? How do we live out our faith in our sports and all these kinds of things? And we, as a community, did some good things, and then we all struggled, as we all do. But praise and worship was a huge deal. I started loving praise and worship at the non-denominational church. It became a big deal in our youth group after we started going to the Steubenville youth conferences. And that's been a huge part of my life ever since, because now I'm a worship leader and travel around and help lead people in prayer through music as well. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Marian thing, because that is one of the ones that I've always kind of struggled with. It's one of the, I absolutely agree with what the church says, but the rosary for me personally, I get bored by the rosary. It's just not the thing for me. I'd rather be doing a Bible study. I'd rather be doing Lectio Divina, something like that with the scriptures. That's just what speaks to me more. So I made a deal with Mary when I was in college. I was like, Mama, I can't do this rosary thing. All it does is put me to sleep. But I want to, show my love for you and to ask you to pray for me. What are we going to do? And that week, I think it was that week or that month, for the first time in my life in college, I heard the Angelus prayed, and I said, this is it. So every day at noon since college, probably 10 years now, I've been saying the Angelus, and that is my little Marian devotion every day at noon. Takes about a minute. That's where me and Mary are at.
I'm someone that fell away really hard and fast at age 14, and I didn't come back for 25 years. Most people don't have that big of a break, but I just want you to talk, even if it was for 5 minutes, your darkest moments, I want you to talk about what that was like for you as a cradle Catholic.
Yeah, so the thing right after I went to that Steubenville is like, okay, everything in my life is for Jesus now. I was throwing away all of my secular music, break the CDs, throw them away, get everything that's bad out of here. And that lasts for about 3 weeks, I think a lot of people who have had experience with Christ, especially at that young age in junior high or high school, have had that same experience. Like, everything's changing now. I started going all for God, but all throughout high school and even into college, essentially what I was doing was living two lives. I was youth group kid. I was the kid helping out with music, helping out with retreats, retreat junkie, going to all the conferences. That's what I was on Sunday, and maybe 4 days out of the week, but still struggling with sexual sin, still struggling with pride, still struggling with not putting God first at all. Sports was my number one. I was an athlete from the age of 5. I was a 4-sport athlete in high school. I ran track in college. Sports was what I was all about. And all of that stuff, it's if I had the choice at the time to work out, to get better at my sport, or to pray, I was going to work out. That was the whole first commandment. No other gods before me. I absolutely had them. So all throughout those times, just absolutely struggling, kind of behind the scenes, right? In the light, I looked like I was a good, practicing Catholic, and I really was striving for that. But there were so many dark days amidst all of this time where I'd be, struggling with porn or struggling with girls, or I had a girl that I was dating one time. We were hanging out, just the two of us, and she looked me in the eye after we did some things we shouldn't have, and she said, you know what I like about you? you're one person at church and one person with me. And I said, oh, no. And I broke up with her and I never talked to her again. I was just like, that was a huge realization for me. It's like, she's right. Like, I can't be a split person. I have to be one person. I have to make a choice. Which one am I going to be? And thank God, because of my mom's prayers, I picked the following Christ.
You mentioned earlier this sort of dichotomy between knowledge and experience, and how Catholicism was maybe a little bit too cerebral and the non-denominationalism was very experiential. Can you talk from your own experience? What have you learned? What have you learned from the Protestants? What have you learned from the Catholics? And how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think we bridge the gap with looking at the example of Jesus. I mean, Jesus absolutely was balanced in a two. You know, he had his Sermon on the Mount. He had the John 6. He has these great teaching moments, but he is involved intimately in the lives of his followers, involved intimately in the lives of the people he's healing, involved intimately in the lives of the Pharisees and Sadducees who follow him around and get berated by our Lord. I mean, I love his interactions with the Pharisees and Sadducees. But I think what the Catholic Church did for me, like my home parish, and I think that this is systemic throughout at least all of America and throughout many, many years in the past, is that like the Catholic Church wants to impart this knowledge, impart the fullness of truth, impart the teachings of the church into people, with really struggling to make it, okay, what does this mean for my life? What did it mean for me as a young man with my struggle with girls, with my struggle with pride? Like, I learned all these things, but how does this connect to how do we share that in a way that's connecting to our real life? I think it's in faith communities, like in discussion groups and small groups. I'm in a men's Bible study with other guys my age. We break open the scriptures. We talk about the scriptures for like 10 minutes, and then we're applying it to our lives. It's like, you know, some guys are struggling with their kids. Some guys are struggling in their marriage. Some guys are struggling with whatever. And we're able to sit down and talk about it and actually apply it to our lives. And the beauty is really in bringing them both together. Yeah. So a lot of like my ministry is trying to answer that. Is how can I take the teachings of the church, the fullness of the teachings, and apply them to young people's lives, to my listeners' lives? And I think a lot of it is just having this Catholic worldview of like, okay, how can I see everything in this world through the knowledge that I have of Christ?
The answer to every question is Jesus Christ, basically. So that's makes sense that was your answer.
That's just what I'm going to say for the rest of the interview. Every question you ask, Jesus Christ.
What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Jesus Christ. Now it just sounds like I'm taking the Lord's name in vain.
So I don't want to dwell on this.
Vanilla, by the way.
French vanilla or...
Homemade vanilla from Bluebell Ice Cream here in Texas.
I don't want to dwell on anything negative, but there has been some talk about this sex scandal in the States. Can you just give your perspective? Maybe you've had some insight, or maybe you've meditated or prayed about it. Can you just talk a little bit from your heart?
Yeah, man, this has been consuming the lives of so many of us recently. It's absolutely heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. It's stupid, and frankly, it just makes me angry. Like, I've been so angry for the last month, like barely able to hold it in. The good thing is I do have this community of people, fellow Catholics, parishioners, the people that I work with, my friends, fellow podcasters that I've been able to talk with. And like, we're all struggling through this together. Like, we don't know the answers. We're lost. We don't know what's going on. We don't know who to trust, but the answer is Jesus Christ again, right? It's like the thing that kind of tipped the scales for me a bit from going to this, like running one way, like what is going on? Why are we even a part of this? This is all nasty and gross. Like the thing that turned me back was just like, God's so good, man. These readings over the last few weeks have just been so pertinent for what we've been going through. And one of the big ones for me was two stories from Peter, or from the Gospels about Peter. So the one is when he goes out to walk on the water, right? A couple of things that I hadn't realized until the midst of this scandal is that there's a storm going on in the middle of this. And whenever I pictured this story, even though it's not what it says, I pictured it being like a still lake and Jesus out there and like Peter walks on a still lake, right? There's a storm going on. The people are afraid. Jesus walks out, like, if it's really you. And Peter walks out of the boat in the middle of the storm. Everything's going crazy. There's lightning flashing. There's rain coming down, thunder, all this stuff's going on. But he steps out in faith onto the water, and because he trusts Jesus and he's looking at Jesus. He walks out there on the choppy water, and we all know how the story goes, right? He looks down, he takes his eyes off of Christ and starts looking at the waves, starts looking at the lightning. Then he starts to fear all the stuff that's going on. And then he looks up at Jesus and he says the most simple prayer of all time and one of my favorites: Lord, help me, save me. And what does Jesus do? He picks him up and he's like, why did you doubt? And that's what a lot of us are doing right now. It's what I've been doing and how I've been trying to use this story to change my focus on. It's like we are all so much looking at the darkness, looking at the waves, looking at the lightning, looking at the water, when we all stepped out in faith to live for God initially. And we were looking at him. We were all focused on him. Even though there was these waves and there was these storms going on, we had our eyes on him. We took them off. Now we feel like we're lost and drowning. We're freaking out. And like for real reason, like I'm struggling with this as much as anybody else is. But the only hope we have is just to look up Jesus, say, Lord, save me. In the midst of this storm, we need you. That's the first story of Peter. And then the second one is we've been in the Bread of Life discourse on Sunday's Gospels for it feels like an eternity. I think it's been actually a month. And, reading through that and seeing how many questions Jesus is asked and he doesn't really answer them. It's a time of confusion. He says, eat my flesh. People walk away. And I can feel the frustration of the people that walk away. I can feel the frustration even in Peter. It's like, I don't know what's going on, God, but there's an option. I can walk away like those guys in John chapter 6:66, or I can be like Peter and throw up my hands in the same kind of exasperation. Like, where else am I going to go? You have the words of eternal life. Like, I trust you, right? And like, I think I've heard that story contrasted before where it's like they walked away and Peter was like pristine in his faith. I'm like, I don't see that anymore. I see an exasperated man throwing up his hands like, where else am I going to go? Like, I've got nothing else other than you. Even though I don't get what's going on, I'm sticking with you, Jesus. And like, that's where I'm trying to be. That's been my prayer the last few weeks.
So I want you to talk about the holiness of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. What is that? Why do you believe in it? Why do you continue to believe in it? Or do you, since this particular scandal?
Yeah, I mean, it's been rough, and I would be lying to you if I said I hadn't questioned it at some point. But like, Jesus founded this church. He said that the gates of hell are not going to prevail against it. He sent his Holy Spirit to be with us in the midst of trying times. Like, the church has been through trying times for 2,000 years. This one is a huge, monstrous bomb for all of us in the world. I mean, even for non-Catholics. Like, this is just rocking so many different people. And the thing that's holding me firm is the foundation of Christ, and that his church that he put forth is holy. But there are a lot of unholy people in the church. And as we've seen here recently, sadly, way too many unholy men leading our church. It's like Satan has taken a hold of a few of them, right? But even in the midst of this time, like, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Like, Satan hates the church. He's going to continue to fight against it, continue to try to take down the things that we trust the most, right? If we trust in our priests and our bishops, he's going to try to attack that. And he does this to us on a personal level as well. It's like, okay, what are the parts that he can take out within me, kind of lower my defenses so that I can fall into sin. It's like, these are his tactics that he's been using absolutely forever. And the only reason that I'm still Catholic, despite all of these scandals and all of this ugliness, is number one, the Eucharist. I can't leave the Eucharist. Just like Peter in that story, I can't leave because I believe so much that bread and that wine become the body and blood of Christ, as Jesus says in the Gospels. Like, I can't leave that. Even when I went to the non-denominational church in 7th and 8th grade, like, I had this amazing experience of community and scriptures and worship. But even then, I felt like this small piece was missing. And that's what I found out right at that Steubenville conference. Like, this is what I was missing. It was the Eucharist. Number two, the confessional, because I am a dirty, rotten sinner, and I absolutely need that sacrament. If I didn't have it, I honestly don't know what I would do. And the third thing that I'm like, why I'm still Catholic and why I'm still in this faith is because, man, I've had so many questions. I eventually get them all answered. Eventually. I mean, I had this list in my phone of hundreds and hundreds of questions, like, why do we believe this? Why do we believe this? What does this verse mean? How does this verse fit with the Catholic teaching of this? And I just had that list since college and just narrowed it down. Got answers. Got it down. And I've never been led astray by the church as a whole. Now, there have been individuals in the church that have absolutely hurt me, absolutely tried pushing me away from the church, whether intentionally or unintentionally, but individuals, leaders, this sort of thing, that it's been rough, man. But like so many people are saying this recently, and I think it really is it's just one of the things getting us through this. It's like, I follow Jesus' church. I'm a part of the bride of Christ, the church. As broken and as hurting as we are, like Jesus is coming to save his bride, and that's what I'm a part of.
I want to get your opinion on homosexuality in particular. What would you say, for example, to a young nephew that came up to you that was apparently Catholic, but that was unrepentantly homosexual, that wanted to pursue the priesthood? What advice would you give to a hypothetical young man that was unrepentantly homosexual? What advice would you give? And then just talk generally about your take on homosexuality and how it relates to the crisis, please.
It's just really hard for me to talk about that one right now in the midst of this pedophilia scandal. But if he was unrepentant, obviously he can't be a priest. But I think the real problem is the pedophilia, and the homosexuality problem is a problem in and of itself. But I don't know what to say. Like the tagline for my show is to make Catholicism fun again. There's nothing fun about this. It seems to be sucking out all of our joy.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Pope Francis? Do you give him the benefit of the doubt always? Have you found it easy to love and admire him? How has that ride been for you? Because it's been difficult for a lot of people that consider themselves on the right politically. I don't know where you stand politically. I don't really care either. But just as a human being, how does his pontificate strike you?
Right. Yeah. So my show, Forte Catholic, and the tagline, I mentioned it earlier, make Catholicism fun again. Like, I thought of that and I was like, okay, I want people to enjoy their time, but I also want there to be this real truth. Like, you know, obviously using entertainment, using joy, using jokes, using whatever to draw people in. And then, like, once you have people captivated, like sharing the real message of the gospel, sharing the truths of the church, all that sort of thing. And a lot of that comes from Pope Francis' Joy of the Gospel, because he talks about that same thing. That document was so influential in my life. Because, like, one of my favorite lines is in the first chapter of that letter, and it talks about so many Catholics are living their lives like Lent without Easter. And, like, that's essentially what we're trying to do here. Make Catholicism fun again, bring the joy back. Like, Christ won victory for us on the cross. We shouldn't be walking in our Catholic guilt, our shame, whatever. Like, he won that for us. Go to confession and then you're good. You know, like, we should be a joyful people, not moping around like it's a Good Friday all the time. Like, we have both. We have Good Friday and then we have Easter. So I've always loved him, and there's been some of these things, like, you know, over the last years, I've always just kind of chuckled. Like, he says something on a plane, unscripted, and everybody, like, goes crazy. I'm just like, whatever, man. Like, every word this guy is saying is recorded. If every word I was saying was recorded, people probably wouldn't like that either. But I get it's different. I'm just me, and he's the Pope. But this whole scandal thing has brought question to just about everybody. Like, I'm questioning almost everything, right? And like this last week has been weird. I don't have enough information. I haven't read all the Vegano stuff. I'm just trying to keep up, man. Like, I don't know how this is all going to play out, man, with the accusations against him. And I think I just have to sit back and wait.
Yeah. I just want to give a little suggestion to you and to every other faithful Catholic. The basic idea is that I find it very improbable that Pope Francis has ill will towards the church, toward Jesus Christ, toward the faithful. I really find it very unlikely. And that is the essential question. Does he have ill will? Has he been operating with ill will or goodwill? He's protected from teaching error concerning faith and morals when he does it in a very well-defined way or during an ecumenical council, but the rest of the time, he's going to make mistakes. Why? Because he's a fallen sinner in a fallen world, and he's not God. You know, he is the vicar of Christ, but...
And he's 81 years old. Give him a break.
I challenge anyone to keep up with his schedule. I challenge anyone to do what he does and to do a better job. I mean, I think it's ridiculous to criticize the Pope. I really do. And if someone's calling for his resignation, I think that's just pure emotion. I don't think it's rational. I don't think it's sane. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's charitable. Now, they may have good reasons, but the real pertinent question for me is, does he have goodwill? I think he does.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I really would. Yeah, we got into that, man. I'm sweating.
I'd like you to really talk to me, because I've never listened to your podcast. What's your format? What are the highlights? Who have been some of your favorite guests? And what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your faith from doing the podcast? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. It's called Forte Catholic. It's here in Red Sea Radio. This is where it all started, here locally in Bryan College Station, Texas. I did an internship in radio when I was in college at Guadalupe Radio in San Antonio, and I got the bug. You know, the radio bug, you catch it, and you're like, okay, I have to do this. I studied music industry in college, so like how to work the board, all the technical stuff. But I watched all these hosts, and I was like, I want to do that. Fast forward 5 years later, I move here, and essentially all I did was follow the parable of the persistent widow. I kept asking, hey, can I have a show on your radio station? Here's my pitch. Here's everything that I can do. And they kept saying, oh, not yet. We're busy, blah, 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 blah. Everything was changing, right? And then finally, they put me at like nighttime so that nobody would listen, right? And then after a year, man, it's continued to grow. It's been 2 years now. So at year one, they were like, okay, your show is actually pretty good. They moved me to the morning slot. My friends over at St. Michael Radio in Tulsa, Oklahoma said, okay, we're going to air your show as well. Also, a few months after that, Cairo Radio in North Carolina said, hey, we're going to air your show. It's also on the podcast. So it's continuing to grow, man. It's been a fun, we're coming up on our 100th episode in a couple of weeks. So it's been a wild ride. So for people that haven't listened to the show yet, it's an hour-long show, but the podcast is about 54 minutes or so. We do 3 segments. The first segment, me, my producer, we have a conversation about what's going on. We have a topic. We play a game. We have a mixture of having fun. Like we'll play like faith-based games, and I'll share something that came out of the scriptures that I was reading. We laugh a lot. We have amazing guests, man. This has been one of my favorite parts about the show is I get to talk to people that I absolutely shouldn't be talking to, right? All the Catholic Answers people have been on. So like your Tim Staples, your Carla Broussard, Jimmy Aiken, all those guys. Like Tim Staples called me bro. That was like a life-changing experience. Like Tim Staples says I'm a bro, you know? Here recently, I love being on like Catholic Twitter. So the new king of Catholic Twitter, Father Anthony Serapa up in Pittsburgh. He's a good friend of mine. He's been on the show. We play Fortnite together. It's a blast. A bunch of local people here, like Father Jared Cook, another podcaster, Allison Sullivan, have been on the show. And one of the biggest Catholic streamer in the world is named Ninja. His brother, his older brother, is also a streamer, and he essentially is in youth ministry, is in catechesis and evangelization at his parish. He streams as well. His stream is all about reaching people and sharing the gospel while he's playing Fortnite. He's phenomenal, man. That's been our most popular episode by far. So I have a blast talking to these people. It's essentially, we were talking earlier about connecting the knowledge of the faith with like our actual lives and our experience. That's what we're trying to do with the show.
Wow. I usually at the end of my interviews, I just ask my guests to sort of wrap up with a final thought, something positive, a message of hope. So what might you be able to say to someone that might be out there listening now?
To the Catholics, I would say, find a little joy in your life. Like, remember the entire point of the gospel was that we're all broken sinners and Jesus came back to teach us how to live and then to die for the times that we didn't live it out and rise again to bring us to new life. Like, that's the piece as Catholics that I think so many of us miss. One of my favorite things to talk about is how Catholic guilt must die. We need to change our guilt that we feel, our shame, into conviction to change, move forward, leave all that guilt and shame in the back, go to confession. If it's just a venial sin, say the Confiteor during Mass, and you're good. Like, let's live in the joy that Jesus won for us on the cross and not cheapen that victory by still beating ourselves up and saying, oh, mea culpa, mea culpa. Like, it's always me, I'm always bad. For those who are listening that aren't Catholic, that aren't, especially those who aren't of a faith, man, this faith thing is a journey. We all have our questions too. You have so many questions. You know that we'd all love to answer them for you. We'd love to just walk with you in this. And there is so much joy to be found in community and in the scriptures and in the Eucharist.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.